Go ahead. Okay. Awesome. Well, I think it's still morning, right? So good morning. John Miller from FEMA Region 2. And I'm a mitigation liaison to the state of New Jersey and Go Mitigation Nation. I've heard a lot of mitigation support here this morning. Some of you in the room, though, know me as the never-ending detailee to the Senate Banking, Housing, Urban Affairs Committee. And I kind of feel like the NFIP, right? I just feel like this can that just keeps getting kicked down the road. So anyway, I can understand. So I'm coming down this morning from Philadelphia. I teach a course at UPenn called Floodplain Management in a Changing Climate, and I called it not floodplain management in climate change or in the era of climate change, because I am seeing a changing climate. Yes, we do talk about climate change, but I'm also seeing this hunger by millennials and Generation Z. They're our hope. You know, they're gonna be changing things. They're gonna be doing things. We're setting the stage maybe for them. We're teaching them what we know, but they're gonna have to make bigger changes in the years ahead. So one of the great things about being part of a region of FEMA is that you get to go down to the community level. You get to, interact and participate with communities that are really on the front line of what we're talking about here. We have this thing in Region 2 called the Resilience Accelerator, and we have been having these conversations with both riverine and coastal communities. And I would say the most serious conversations are happening in South Jersey along the Delaware Bay Shore. We're having raw discussion. When I say raw, I was coming into one of the meetings. I was meeting with some other communities in the basement of this building, and I come up to the upper level, and I mean, it looked like it was going to break out in a fist fight was going on. But these were communities in the Delaware Bay Shore, Cumberland County, New Jersey, that are facing, when you talk about climate change, sea level rise, they're facing it right now. They have a culture down there. There's a lot of fishermen. There's a lot of shell fishermen. And their whole community is threatened right now by climate change and sea level rise. So you're getting these raw conversations, and it's exciting for me to see that and actually have the conversations that we need to have. I'm seeing the growing appetite for change at the community level. So this gets me to my job, which is basically introducing Roy Wright. Roy Wright, of course, everyone knows, is the president and CEO of the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. But we also know Roy in his previous position with FEMA as the Deputy Associate Administrator for Insurance and Mitigation. Again, Go Mitigation. So Roy's going to give us a talk on avoiding catastrophe, or a keynote on avoiding catastrophe, turning risk into resilience. Again, the change that's ahead of us. So thanks, Roy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and for the invitation, Carolyn, to be here. I'm a has-been in the FEMA world. I've got enough space between where I had been. But I was walking around this morning, and what I love about this space is I counted 7 different professional circles that I live in, all swirling in this room, which makes things a whole lot of fun for me. So I am the salad course before your lunch. I am very aware of where that's at in the backside of the time here. So I want to move through this with a decent amount of pace, but I want to do it in a way that connects the dots from some of the conversations yesterday and setting some of the table for what's going to follow, so that we find pathways forward. Some of you know about the work that we do at IBHS. For others of you, you're like, I don't know quite what this is. Then is a space. We have a facility in just outside of Charlotte where we do full-scale testing about how Mother Nature comes in and affects the built environment. It's the only facility in North America that can do this work and look at the impact of wind and rain in those kind of contests. We do it on wildfire, the only place in this hemisphere that can test at full scale wildfire embers attacking buildings and how those pieces work. We recreate and take the data from hurricanes like Florence and others, and then over the course of 9, 12, and 20 hours, replicate those pieces. Some really cool work on hail and how that drives a good bit of insurance losses across the country. The work that we do. But it's not just work that we do inside a lab, it's out in the field, because we need to take what we see in that controlled environment and find those pieces and how they meet together. What happens after the disaster? Does it match what we have seen in those spaces? Where did we see the devastation, and where did we actually see the neighborhoods that survived? Understanding they didn't survive because of luck, but there's a set of factors that are in that space. That's what we do, and that's IBHS all inside of a minute. But I think that as we look at these pieces, so much of what I get to focus on is this point that we keep watching how the impact of these disasters, the severe weather, the climate-driven pieces, and how they disrupt lives and displace families. Even to the point that if you can survive the financial side of the equation, the fabric of your community was ripped apart. Your family got distributed in different directions. And so, well, I can't stop the hurricane or the tornado. I may not be able to stop the ignition. It really looks at us, can we narrow the path of destruction? Can we prevent the avoidable part of the suffering? And so over the course of the next 17, 18 minutes, what I want to do, and Zach used this term that I had already included in my remarks, is this constructive discontent. And can we translate constructive discontent into systemic approaches with real recognizable incremental progress? So oftentimes I come into rooms like this and we talk about the growing cost of disasters, and rightfully so. We love to look at billion-dollar events. There were 341 of these through 22. There's already been 23 more of them this year. But I know the people in this room and the 7 professional circles that are all swirling, we know this. This doesn't surprise us. Yet, I think we fall short because we all too often find it sufficient to admire the problem and even come together and collectively admire the problem. And I wonder where the will is to keep persevering and make sure that we change something on the other side of it. Obviously, I spent a lot of time on mitigation. And the upside is we have science that can address the impact of disasters. I can't remove them, but we can narrow the impact of them. We do have that in hand for us. There have been other panels that got on the details of this and will come up, and so I'm not going to go through the details as much. I want to connect the dots. So inside the Fortified program, you look at what played out in Alabama, right? Alabama experiences Hurricane Ivan in 2004. They have the effects in 2005, Dennis and Katrina. You look at these pieces play out. They laid out a pathway in that space. They said, we don't want to have this experience again. And a set of things came together. There were builders and developers who said, we know consumers need a different product, that helped lead the way to make sure that there were good codes so that there was a common denominator that was put into place. There were insurance drivers related to what kind of consideration was going to be given in price. But you look collectively at this element, and we're talking a lot about the crisis that might be in play. But when you go across the Gulf Coast right now, there's only one state that would tell you their insurance market isn't somewhere between chaos to crisis, and it's Alabama. They didn't get there overnight, but you look at the 15-year kind of horizon that allowed them to get into that space. the pieces are clear. Sally come in. They saw a reduction in claims rate. They saw a reduction in the overall prices of that. You had the conversations and a bit more coming on some of the pieces that have played out in North Carolina. So you look at Matthew, Florence, Dorian, Isaias, we see a reduction in these pieces. It produces something that is better risk, and it does affect and help make it more affordable and from a price perspective. But it really makes sure that after the storm, they have a place to go back to that they call home. After the evacuation, they go home. You can see this on the wind side in hurricanes with fortified. You look at wildfire. Again, in this kind of space, there's all kinds of elements that drive ignition, which deserves a lot of attention. And I look at elements related to fuel loads and the pieces in the broader ecosystem. But the point of greatest difficulty on wildfire is when it invades the community. It is a really bad day when someone who lives in a rural context loses their home. But when we have conflagration of the 2,200 homes in Maui or the 19,000 structures we saw in the Camp Fire, that's the point by which we have crisis. So what are we doing in this space? So again, the science on this is sufficiently clear. And collectively, the regulators recognize this, the insurance industry recognizes this, the consumer groups recognize this, the local officials recognize this. I mean, all four are aligned on this. California Department of Insurance collaborated, so they wanted to know what the science was behind this. Commissioner Lara pushes out Safer from Wildfire in this direction. This stuff walks hand in hand with consumer groups. There are things by which ultimately companies had to come meet in that space. And we can show you, and another time I'll walk you through all the details that are in place about what has to systemically be in place, but make sure there's not a hospitable place for the embers to go, so when they arrive, your home doesn't incinerate. And there's pieces of it, the brown elements that are here that you can do at a retrofit level. The blue elements are most likely at that plus level, the kind of pieces that you would do at the point of new construction. We know what to do. The science has been clear. We can look going back to studies from 2014 and earlier about the impact that has related to woody vegetation that is immediately adjacent. Those of you who don't live in wildfire country, the 5 feet closest to your house is a big stinking deal. Immaculately non-combustible. Has to be the case. Doesn't eliminate all the conflagrations. I'm not here to say it does, but there's a 40% reduction in this space. Those other elements of defensible space, because we go from 0 to 5 and then 5 to 30. Okay, those pieces are there. It's not brand new. 2013, the first pieces are published in this space. Working with others of the modelers, you can see those elements in terms of the survivability of it. Yeah, those overhanging trees, there's data on these pieces, right? All these elements are in play. Yet, even though the pathways to mitigate, which is to say to narrow the impact of the risk, are clear, we don't see enough people choosing that pathway. And this is the kind of thing that gets me spending hours upon hours in little aluminum tubes cogitating. When I get that quiet time to myself on an airplane and go, why? So let me take you, we're at university, so I thought I'd go back a little bit from a literature perspective. And it makes me think of Charles Dickens. And there is this sense of a tale of two cities. We're close enough to lunch. I plan to actually read you the first paragraph of this just to inspire you, but enough of you will recall it and can read it as it goes along the way. Here's what we keep watching. I'm going to use some generic pieces, so please don't try to put me in that goes, oh, I got a different price point for you. I'm going to make this point with two kind of heuristics. Let's take a normal homeowner in California who has property insurance, and let's say it's a $2,000 premium. And we say, hey, you're at risk of wildfire and you should take some actions. Well, most of this you could do it yourself, but you have to change the landscaping around your house. It may cost you $1,700, $3,000. Maybe you have a lot of it. Maybe it's a $5,000 thing you need to take on. And you get recognized on the other side of this, and you get a 10% discount. Your $2,000 premium went to $1,800. And folks start going, nope, I don't see the return on that investment. Like, oh, but your home's going to be survivable. It's going to be there. They're like, nope. Not interested. Not interested at all. But I've been talking with folks who have made the uneasy path from the primary market to the residual market. And then they say, well, oh, I made it into the FAIR plan and my premium's now $7,000. Can I have my way back to the other side? Can I go do all of those things now? And we have these two pathways that are there. I think one of the most difficult things from a choice architecture and from a behavioral economics perspective right now is that sometimes the economics are a bit distant. There's the immediate kind of action that you can take that is a bit of a Band-Aid, but you're like, it doesn't pay back enough. But the day you get sent across the transom, you're like, will you ever let me back? Now I will take that action. Because price is an interesting signal. It communicates risk, and you're at the near side versus the other side. I think as I sit in this space, I start going back to the thinking, and many of you some years ago would have read Thaler's book, Nudge. How do we get folks to kind of take these actions? And I'm going to offer it this way. I think there's at least 5 different pieces right now where there are elements that need to collectively do this. When you look at the pieces that Thaler talks about, you can talk about individual pieces, but when we truly see nudges, there have to be pieces that really begin to turn into collective or all of the above actions that are in place. There's some good progress being made down these pathways. Yeah, I look at some of the things related to safeguarding community revolving loan funds. Sometimes that Storm has moved out. The community resilient zone CEDARS has played out. Marion this morning talked about CDBG and where those pieces are going, and BRIC and the forthcoming climate framework and all these pieces. And I go, oh, they might have those pieces in play. There are states by which there are requirements related to price considerations that have to be brought into place, and some of those sit here. The building industry, who does have a nearer term view, because usually their capital is at risk for a year or two, they don't take a longer view. But I gave you the example in Alabama where it was the building industry is actually one of the big voices in that space. I look at codes, I look at these pieces and go, even across this room, many, maybe most of us tend to live in one of these silos. And maybe occasionally live in your silo and just poke at the others. How do we scale resilience? It's getting beyond the silos, and insurance says this system, remember the constructive discontent that has system-based approaches, requires us to reach across there. The good news is the conversations and the agenda of this meeting are facilitating that very piece. We have the proof, we've got the science, we've got the elements. I look forward to like a wildfire prepared home. I look at these pieces. But this mountain of human behavior, this mountain of misperceiving the risk, the mountain of widely held belief systems that we stubbornly cling to, requires inertia. So, direct quote from you from Thayer. First, never underestimate the power of inertia. And second, that power can be harnessed. I think that's the piece that is there. It's not going to be easy. I tell you, statewide building codes, we know what to do. We put it into great codes in this space, but you look across the country, and I know the light fades us a bit. There's only 12 states that actually have statewide enforced codes. It's 28% of US jurisdictions today. Lest you think if they just have a couple of experiences, they'll get there. Let me show you since 1950 where the landfalling hurricanes are, where the tornadoes have placed, and where the widespread wildfires are. Really, it's Florida and California who carry most of those 28% of the jurisdictions. Simply having experience hasn't changed people's view on that. Doesn't mean we shouldn't care about codes and make the case to them. There's great work that has been done in showing how those investments play. But it's a really, really long game. How do we collectively pull those together? That takes each one of you inside your domain, finding ways to integrate across systems in that place. Because what does unify every single person in this room and those that we play out is this. There's real people. There is a real family at the other side of this. Hurricane Michael makes a direct hit at the panhandle of Florida. Paul Jackson, who made a decision to build a fortified house, his was not the castle that you could see that made the front of the New York Times. A little bit more normal kind of place. The water came in, and he went home 2 days later. We were out in Paradise, California. They're rebuilding. Casey said, I'm going to have a home that if these events come my way again, I will have taken the actions that are so necessary. So I'll leave us this way. How do we, across this room, across the conversations from yesterday, this morning, and what will come on the agenda this afternoon, how do we nudge to an all-of-the-above approach? How do you take the piece where you are the expert, where you're actually the national leader, because that's what most of this room is, and move from the discontent, so move from just pure admiration of the problem to constructive discontent? How does that discontent turn to systemic approaches? And then not become so high-minded, and instead say, okay, now that I know where that systemic approach is going, we can make incremental progress. This is not a snap of the fingers. This is not a silver bullet. Mother Nature has been and will continue to barge through the front door of American families. We need to make sure that families have homes that they can return to. Thank you.
Roy, you alluded to behavioral economics. Do we have those practitioners in the room today?
Yes. Some of them were on the last panel.
I know.
What I will tell you, and there was a school of folks that were around one of the great apostles in this space up at Wharton, and some of his disciples and friends are here in this room. It's been part of the conversation. It needs to continue to grow to be an even larger part of the dialogue beyond just the thought leaders, but to understand and work with policymakers to understand that taking just one of these actions doesn't actually get you down that point, to use the technical terms, in the choice architecture for them to work there. Yes, we're involved, and we're not winning yet.
Long game, though. Incremental.
Well, it is a long game, and I won't back off of the fact that it's a long game, but I think sometimes we're satisfied to simply say it's a long game, so I'll keep admiring the problem. You got to make incremental, stepwise progress. Otherwise, this is just a happy little sorority, fraternity gathering to get together with friends.
You mentioned the Storm Act. You mentioned Cedars. When you're in the aluminum tube with, I'm going to say with wings, right?
They do have wings, yes. I can't afford to go in the one that just has an engine in the backside.
Do you ever think about the community rating system that FEMA has? And not that it's a perfect system, but is there anything we can learn from that, which you used to oversee when you were?
Yeah. So this might be a little bit of a contrary view.
Okay.
Particularly with the actions this administration and Congress has taken over the last 3 years. We have never had a better set of tools and resources available at a federal level. And I'm convinced we won't ever see this level of funding, at least for another generation. We just got to start using the tools in our hand, right? How do you turn the brick money into these pieces? Mm-hmm. How do you make sure that Cedars actually uses these elements and we see those dollars? How do we then combine that? Because those cases, those are grants for those particularly low and moderate income, other kinds of elements related to housing. And we need agencies to actually deliver on those pieces. And I think they are far too slow in doing so. And I think we need to be demanding on that side. But so all too often, they just need some help getting farther down the road. There are a handful of things that Congress still needs to do. In fact, including things that when states provide grants, they shouldn't be taxed. And we should be leaning in for the additional incentives so homeowners who can afford to take the action choose to do it. Maybe it's only 25% of American households who could do it, but why aren't they taking the action? I think that's the piece. I think CRS is a good one. I think CRS has grown a little long in the tooth, and so conceptually I like it. I don't know that it has continued, but that's just using the tool they have, right? It doesn't require new congressional action. We got to see those pieces, hold the agency's feet to the fire, and make sure that we're working with the communities so that it's not a failure of imagination to utilize those dollars.
I like to think of things, I like to call it positive peer pressure. Mm-hmm. So how do you get other states to look at Alabama and the Fortified program? How do you get other states to see that and say, we want to do that too? How do you get those champions out there from other states?
So all of the above is the answer. So double down is people. It's true across humans, but particular Americans have a recency bias. Louisiana took some great actions after Katrina and kind of went to sleep about these pieces. Mm-hmm. They then have Laura, Delta, and Ida. So I was confusing my Idalia and my Idas together in my head, too many I's. And you're in that kind of space, and then they go, oh, this is chaotic. There's a lot of things that aren't working here. Sometime in the preceding 12 years, they could have looked at what Alabama was doing and did it. But necessity becomes the mother of invention, and the state legislature has done a whole series of pieces in Louisiana. It won't be an overnight. So first, double down when there's an event. How do we act in this space? But then go back to Thayer on some of these nudge pieces. We've got to use various elements both in the marketplace and in the regulatory environment to keep shepherding people into the right kinds of choices. We're never going to get to play, a big sovereign hand. That's not how our system of government is set up. But we have to keep nudging down that space. Right. But I become pretty skeptical about this, right? So in DRA, they say, hey, if you don't have statewide building codes in place, you lose points, and you're not going to be able to get these grant monies. Well, guess what? Enough states that don't have statewide building codes complain that that's not fair. And so it's all softening up. Okay. Go at it again. How do you keep working that? When anyone has a memory of it in the adjacent areas, go to work.
Yep.
But then you've got to use those other elements, and we don't have a full hour for me to give a Thaler nudge a lecture to hand all of those pieces. But that NUDGE, how do you look at those pieces?
So do we have any constructive discontent in the room, and anyone want to ask Roy a question out here? Yes, please.
It's going to take all of the instruments working the dimensions that are in that space. And there are carriers who do that well, and there are many carriers who have opportunities to do more in that space. You know, if you're in the Carolinas, if you're in Alabama, now if you're in Louisiana, you understand fortified roofs. It's becoming part of the vernacular. It takes unfortunately, time, and consumers are very hard to educate, just to be really honest. There's a lot of stimuli that you're trying to be an expert on. So there is a federal entity called the Mitigation Framework Leadership Group that has actually done that assignment 2 or 3 times. And I don't know that it changed the outcome. And so, yes, we should continue to make it clear this is where it goes. Then you've got to, and that's where I think Cedars holds promise. So there's 483 polygons in America with communities now who said you're going to get special help because you would not otherwise be able to maneuver through those pieces. The federal government, when it comes to giving out money, it's really, really complicated. And it's across 12 different appropriations bills and all the kinds of pieces. And I cannot defend any of that. I think that clearinghouse has been created 3 or 4 times, and it's still not getting to the people who need it. I think when Congress created Cedars, and I do hope they get to the second wave of that really stimulates more private sector investment in it as well. But I think Cedars might be the first opportunity where Congress said, give these communities every bit of help to get their outcomes to look different. Okay, do I think FEMA knows exactly how to do that? And do I think they're going to pull all the right pieces together? I don't know, but I think Congress did its job by creating the piece and making it really clear, these are the folks you're supposed to help get to that finish line. Let's use those clearinghouses. Let's lay down these paths. Because the community actually doesn't care what color the money is. They just need some help to change the outcome. Right? One more. Yes, ma'am. That's one of the gaps as I look across the 5 we've got to close. And I can point you to a handful of folks who do it well and not enough of them do. There are technicalities, and it really is a technicality, but the contract says they're giving you the money and you get to put it back the way you want to. So I don't know that the insurer can actually force you to put it back one way or another, but they can sure nudge and incentivize you and make sure you've got the information. I watched what happened post-Sally in Alabama. And the ecosystem, it wasn't just the insurers, but the builders, the roofers, et cetera, knew enough that became the norm. I'm hoping we migrate there in Louisiana over the next 3 years so that we are in a better space down that front. Right after a disaster, when someone is dealing with their insurance claims, is one of the hardest times to think that's when we're going to provide the best information. There's a lot of confusion and chaos going on. They want back in their house. They want those next actions to take place. It's all 5 dimensions. Yes, on the insurers. Yes, on the builders. Yes, on the contractors. Yes, on the local leaders. And it requires everyone in that collective ecosystem to do that road. And so I'm not willing to excuse any one of the parties. You're an example in that kind of space that goes, we've got to walk down this path. I do think that what we're beginning to see in a set of states now, it's the default in Alabama. It's the default, and you'll hear from the North Carolina insurance pool later today, that they have added an endorsement so that when you have the disaster hit you and affect your roof, you get the fortified roof on the other side. That's actually put into the product on the way in. And so we're seeing places where it's working, and it's got to work itself through through the system. I know I'm supposed to be last, but Gina, right behind you, has done that work. Yes. Yeah. Yes. You're not touching that, and I appreciate that. But yes, so we're all headed to lunch. But what I was saying in that space, and this goes back, and I know that the book Nudge is 15, 18 years old. If you haven't read it in the last 5 years, you need to go pick it back up again. And if you've never read it, it should be mandatory reading for you all. Part of what she's describing, and I think part of what needs to be there, yes, insurers need to provide the information and the like. One of the ways you nudge is you change what you start selling, what you're selling. And if the default for roofers is to sell you a product that you need as opposed to the black roof, the things that you like, this ain't what I need, right? We have to affect the totality of the system. So thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Hold on. And another plug for a book is Oster's Paradox. I require my students to read it in my class. So anyway, are you good? Are you off to your aluminum tube?
All afternoon.
Okay. So Roy's going to be here. I know I saw a bunch of other hands wanted to ask questions. Roy's going to be here. So let's give Roy a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you to Roy.